Opus X is an example of us acknowledging the fact that traditional publishing, or what you would call, or what anybody would call legacy, there's a lot of knowledge there. It's not something to say, oh, I don't want to be, traditional. I think anybody who thinks that way is missing out. And likewise, traditional companies that think, I don't want to be indie, they're missing out. Because the being nimble, the being agile, I think is something that they need to have.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 178 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In this episode, I have an interview with Judith and Michael Anderle of Lmbpn Publishing. Now, Lmbpn Publishing, see I said that twice in a row without stumbling, is the publishing company for the Arthurian Gambit and other universe novels. They've published collaborations with Justin Sloan, Craig Martell, T.S. Paul, C.M. Raymond, L.E. Barbant, Paul C. Middleton, Amy Hopkins, Ellie Clark, P.T. Hilton, Candy Crumb, Martha Carr, Sarah Boyce, A.L. Noor, Sarah Nofke, and many others. They've done audio-only projects, they've done foreign translations, and a massive, wide publishing Opus X project, employing collaborations from across the publishing and bookselling landscape. Judith and Michael also recently recruited publishing industry veteran Robin Cutler as president at Lmbpn, and I am thrilled to see the dynamic and bold way that they're moving and advancing publishing in general. Now, this is a fascinating interview about the origins of Lmbpn. See, oh my God, I said that so many times and I was so worried I was going to stumble. And the future of Lmbpn, and I'm thrilled to share this conversation with you. But first, before we get into that, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. In this ad read, I'm going to share a new tool that Findaway Voices has recently launched. The audio analysis tool is, as I mentioned, a new tool available for authors who are distributing an already finished audiobook and for narrators working on Findaway Voices audiobook productions, including through their Voices Share program. So after all required audio files have been uploaded to the audio page of a book's project, a blue Analyze Audio Files button will appear unlocked at the bottom of the audio page. All you have to do is click this button to begin the audio analysis of your audio files. Now, the process can take up to an hour or more to complete, depending on the file sizes, but when the audio analysis is finished, you'll be notified via email that the summary is ready, and it'll check for average RMS, peak RMS, bitrate, sample rate, number of channels, mono, stereo, etc. Now, the whole idea of a tool like this is to help prepare authors in advance so that the file is the best it can be to prevent those nasty rejections from places like Audible that may come in 2 or 3 months later because they've been significantly behind for the last year or so. So again, this is just another tool for authors using Findaway for distribution or even creation of their audiobooks to make sure that it's the best possible product that they can have. Findaway Voices is a platform that allows you to control your audiobook destiny. You can find a narrator through Findaway Voices, or as you heard, you can upload your own audio ready files or ready for production files. And again, there's this additional tool so you can just verify that everything's really good to go. It's not going to guarantee that you don't get rejected, of course, but it's just going to be one more of those checks that you do in your professional plan for book releases. And if you're looking for ways that you can leverage Findaway Voices and some of these amazing tools they have available for authors, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. In the interest of trying to keep my introductory matter short, I'm going to skip on comments from recent episodes and in social media. But if you want to leave a comment, you can leave comments over at starkreflections.ca on the episode of your choice. You can also at me on Twitter. I'm at Mark Leslie. So I'm going to jump right into my personal update. I have finished the marathon of work and back and forth with editors on Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, and boy, I was pushing that one to the limit. It launches on Tuesday, February 23rd. I had to have the files ready on the 13th for through Draft to Digital, for example, because they prefer to have the 10-day window to make sure that it gets to all the downstream partners in time for book release. And then I've worked on the hardcover and paperback versions, and I've gotten the final file over to Scott Overton, the narrator. He's the voice of Michael Andrews for the previous books in the series, so I'm kind of pumped about that. A couple things that happen in the writing and rewriting of this is I realized that I bit off more than I could chew in this novel, and it's already, I think the finished version was at about, 91,000 words? I managed to cut it back down to that, and I realized that if I wanted to continue the entire plot, it was going to be closer to 150 or 180,000 words. And I realized the larger story arc I had to break into 2 books, and I did that. And so I also changed a little bit of the focus of this novel to be more about Michael getting over the loss of the love in his life. So the title, Fear and Longing in Los Angeles. Longing's a bigger word than fear, and so there's a lot of longing that he has. But there is a definitely more of a romance feel to this, and in terms of Michael overcoming a personal issue as opposed to defeating the bad guys. And so there's a larger thing that happens with the bad guys that's not going to be fully resolved until the next book, or potentially some of it might not be fully resolved, because I realize that I have generated a bad guy force that is bigger and is going to help explain more of the world. For example, even potentially related to Michael himself, because this is going to be the first time, other than that other werewolf he encountered, that he will have encountered other supernatural beings and the source. And so this has been a really great discovery mechanism for me to learn more about Michael, but also about the universe. And so, to that end, I have already put up for pre-order the next book that I haven't started writing yet, but I have a few scenes, early scenes, and later scenes actually, based on the larger plot arc that I had sort of beat out earlier. And then I obviously had to modify in the edits. But I have the next book ready up for pre-order, and it's coming out in December of 2021, because I don't want to put that off the way I put off this sequel. It took me years to actually get finished writing. And it is called Fright Night's Big City, in the manner of the full-length novels in this universe, having referencing novels or books / movies. I'm following that pattern, and I'm pretty pumped. I got Juan Pedron, who does my covers. I got him to design the cover because I wanted to put that in the back of this book to let people know that the next book continues immediately on the heels of this one, whereas the other ones, there's like a couple year difference between Canadian Werewolf in New York, which took place, I believe, in 2014 or 15. Hang on, I should pick up the book and just double check. I should really know what I'm talking about when I'm sharing this. Yeah, 2014. So 2014 was when Canadian Werewolf in New York takes place, and the novella Stowaway takes place, I believe, in 2015. And then Fear and Longing in Los Angeles takes place in 2017. So I do have some space between them. And one of the reasons I did that with the spacing was it's the suspension of disbelief when you're talking about a world where these other supernatural beings exist and mostly haven't been seen. And therefore, like I was thinking about the Marvel Universe, for example, and I think when I go back to that, I think, yeah, so it's not like he's going to encounter some bad guys that are worth writing about or telling the story of, a full-length novel of every single day or every single month, like in a comic book or something like that. So I did space it out a little bit, but I also spaced it out in a way where I have some other stories to share, sort of between stories that may only be a short story for a short story market, so 5,000, 10,000 words, etc. And I have plenty of spaces in there to share that. For example, the story that I still have the cover for and haven't finished writing, but I did start, which is Lover's Moon, which is basically the story of how Michael and Gail meet. Which, you know, I put that aside, and it was interesting as I was working on the relationship in this book. I was reflecting back on the untold relationship of Michael and Gail, because you never really, all of that previous relationship that he had with his dear friend Gail, who used to be a lover, that all happened off stage. So you never really got to see that. So I know there are readers who have requested that they see that story. But in any case, it's been a really great experience. I've got that launching on the 23rd, and I'm up to my eyeballs now in finishing off the Wide for the Win, which I had to push back till March 16th, and I'm on deadline to get all of that finished. First draft finished by the 26th of February. So I have a little bit of time to go back and forth on some of the edits on that. There have been pieces that have been shared and sort of edited already, but this is sort of the cohesive whole where I actually, instead of it all being all these independent silos and articles, now bringing it together as a whole, which is just a fun, different process for nonfiction. But that's it for my personal update. I know I haven't talked about the progress in the last several episodes for some of my listeners who have reached out and are curious to see if I made any of those deadlines. In terms of other news, it is, if you're Canadian in Canada, February 15th to May 1st, 2021 is when you can register for public lending right, which is basically the opportunity for authors to be compensated for their print books, audiobooks, and ebooks appearing in the library. It's basically revenue for lost sales due to library borrows. And it's a phenomenal program. It does not exist in the U.S., but I shared it on Wide for the Win earlier today. Today is February the 18th, 2021, as I record this. And this morning, when I was working on that chapter for the book Wide for the Win, I shared some of that information on the Wide for the Win group. And even though I've been screaming, it feels like I've been screaming from the rooftops for years that people should pay attention if they're in many of the Commonwealth countries. There's 30 plus countries around the world that have a public lending right, and to look to see if you have one. And it's so fascinating how many authors came back and said, well, how come nobody ever said this? And I'm like banging my head on the desk going, no, but I've been trying to say this for years and years. So I'm going to beat it into the ground. I'm going to say it multiple times because I do not want authors to miss that opportunity. And I realize that it feels to me like I'm just beating a dead horse, or I am, repeating myself over and over again. But I realize sometimes people have to hear something half a dozen, maybe a dozen times before it actually sinks in. Public lending right is a really great way to increase your streams of revenue. And I'm going to talk about a lot more. I haven't gotten my check yet this year for it, but when I was looking at a place like Facebook or whatever, there was notes where this is when the day when I received my check, and so I will continue to do that. I'll continue to share that. I have a couple videos on YouTube about public lending right. I've talked about it on multiple podcasts. I'm going to talk about it a lot on this podcast for you really, really smart listeners. And again, I apologize to any listeners in the U.S. because the U.S. doesn't have a program like this, but there are plenty of countries around the world that do have a program like this. And if you're a Canadian, or you're in the UK or Australia or New Zealand, several other countries that have a public lending right program, definitely look into it, and I'll leave a link for that in the show notes. But that is it for my personal update and my little soapbox about public lending right and stuff like that. Why don't we get on to this fascinating conversation with Judith and Michael? Judith, Michael, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
I'm so thrilled to have you guys here. But for anyone who's not familiar with you two amazing powerhouses in the indie world and in the traditional publishing world, tell us a little bit about first yourselves and how you got into this publishing business.
So I'll start. Back in 2015, November 2015, I released my first book. And because I had been what I call a whale reader, I released a bunch of them in succession. So I wrote really quick, released them on like November 2nd, November 11th, November 23rd, December 15th, I think, and January 5th. And by the third month, I was 5 figures in income. So a little over $10,000 in income in the first 90 days. From that success, I had reached out to a bunch of fans who were asking me questions and said, let me pull you into a group. I called that group 20 Books to 50K to talk about the business. And from there, that particular group has grown over the years. The company itself was doing over 6 figures a month by the end of 2016. So in a year. And then I was able to, based on that information, was able to talk to Judith, and I think it was like about December of 2016 about retiring her, as we call it. And so I didn't realize what that meant to her compared to me. I thought that meant that she might, desire to come work with the company. And then she's turned and was looking at other opportunities within her field. And I'm like, but come over here. But anyway, I'll let Judith, jump through, go from there, because she was already an international marketing director for significant 9-figure power lines.
Wow.
Judith?
Yeah, Judith, you moved from what industry into publishing?
Yeah, so I had over 20 years experience in the medical device and pharmaceutical industry, working for companies such as Novartis, was the last company I worked for before joining Lmbpn. So going from a multi-billion-dollar company to a successful startup was an interesting move.
And risky, because even with success in publishing, like you're going from this gigantic to relying on dude over there to write.
Yes, well, I think it goes to his definition of retirement, right? By the time he said, "Hey, you should really make this move," he had to show me financially that he could, take
She made me do a profit loss statement for the following year.
I said, well,
Wow.
what are the growth projections for your company? And he's like, what? I said, well, what do you plan to do for, year after year? Because after all, the family budget was going to take a significant hit with me leaving the industry. But he assured me that everything was taken care of. And, I really believed in what he was doing. And when I started looking at the fan base and the response that he had, I thought, why not? This is a good time for me to slow down and get closer to the family. For the most part, I was traveling a lot. So Mike was the stay-at-home dad with the boys, and I was all over the world. And so it was time for me to come home, and I thought it was a good opportunity to take. So, and I am a risk taker at heart, so it makes sense.
So it was the best of both worlds, wasn't
it? Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I forget some of these pieces where I'm like, wouldn't you expect your spouse to jump at the opportunity? And she's like, well, I really like to have a 2020, or what year was that? 2017 profit loss expectation as a decision matrix related to whether or not she was going to step down from her present job. And so I had to pull that together. So it was like in January-ish that we met again, to go over this stuff. And so that was just another way for me to understand, how Judith's mind works in some of these things.
Well, so, I mean, Judith's analytical business savvy obviously had rubbed off on you, because the whole concept of the 20 books to 50K was you looking at how you had done in that first 6 months based on the number of books you had, and then you did projections?
Well, in this case, I mean, both of us are entrepreneurial actually by nature. So what had happened at that time is we were down in Cabo San Lucas, and just based on the existing 2 books I had released, and I was about to release the third, we were looking at acquiring a condo down there. And then I realized the cost of living was so low that if I could actually just run based on what I was making at that moment, which was about $7.50 a book for 2 books a day, I go, if I wrote 20 books, we could actually, make more than $50,000 in a year and retire there based on the money that, the house in Texas cost and moving it over to Mexico and everything else. So I could retire her. I didn't realize she had no desire to be retired, because I should probably have asked her, but that was my theory behind it.
Oh, wow. Cool. So what were you Lmbpn Publishing, or is that something that was founded as Judith approved the statement, the projection statement, and said, yeah, I think I'll come work with you?
As I saw what Mike was doing, I was still before retiring, right? I saw that he was putting together this company. And prior to that, I always had an inkling for fashion. And so I would, sign up with all the major magazines and talk about the designers and everything. And so he said, one, as an outlet, right, your creative outlet from the pharmaceutical side and the job that you have, why don't you put together a website? And I thought that's a great idea. And so I started putting together fashion, suits and everything, and styling different things that were coming up. And so Mike created a website for me, and it was called Lmbpn for London, Madrid, Barcelona, Paris, New York, the mix in there. And so I started posting and got some following on Facebook. So when Mike started becoming successful with his publishing, he started thinking about setting up the business. We thought about a brand, and he says, I want it to be Lmbpn because it's the genesis of everything that I'm doing, and because of the major cities. And so we started looking at the logo and trying to think phonetically how it would work. One of the things that I pointed out to Mike from a branding standpoint, I said, this is going to be very difficult for people to pronounce because it's several letters, and what does it mean? And he said, great. Good. That means people will think about it, and they'll come and notice it. I said, great. Well, that's a great idea. And so we decided to make sure that the company was branded much like the little website that I had, and it became Lmbpn. As it turns out, these are the major cities, not only from a fashion standpoint, but from a publishing standpoint as well. Because when we were in Madrid, we were able to visit some of the major publishing companies that were there, and it just it was fortuitous that the two came together.
Oh, that is cool. And I mean, I've long teased you guys, and I think I've called it LMNOP or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I could never get it right.
But, yes.
Yeah.
But I love the look of the brand. It actually is very international, which I know you guys have a very international focus. And let's talk about Disruptive Imagination, which is your sort of your log line, or what would you call that?
Yeah, it's our tagline, right? So if you look at the logo, and I'll step aside so that you can look at it. Disruptive Imagination is basically when the company was being formed, what Mike was doing unto itself, because he was an indie author and he was coming up with ideas and sharing his knowledge for free. He wasn't charging. And he was just talking about how he was building up this business on his own. And people were incredulous, and he would say, no, this is really what's going on. And so he was being disrupted by nature. And then as we talk about the company, and really Mike has a lot of foresight. He says, I want this company not to be only a publishing company, but to be an entertainment company, merchandising company. So basically what the Disruptive Imagination is, the basis that takes the rising sun and raises the pillars, and each pillar eventually will become an entity unto itself. So there's publishing, there'll be merchandising. And so if you see, the letters lend themselves also to all of these different factors. And so basically this is just the beginning of what will eventually be a larger company with different divisions.
I love that you're thinking beyond the book right from the get-go.
Yes.
Right, which is kind of cool. So the other thing I want to go back to is, I think it must have been the first time that I met Michael in person was probably in Austin at Smarter Artists Summit, one of the earlier ones. And I remembered a couple things. I think the thing that stuck out in my mind was that he had been buying Kindles for war vets because he wanted to help them. He wanted to give them something to thank them for what they did for the country, but also because when you're trapped away from your family, away from your loved ones, and you could at least have access to some great content. Obviously, Michael, one of the authors who is writing that, but that was that became in my mind the way when I look at Lmbpn, I look at initially the generosity and collaboration with authors who probably, I think it's fair to say, there are many, many authors who are now very comfortable thanks to collaborations and being an Lmbpn author. It's fair to say that, I think.
That, as well as just from all of the knowledge and encouragement that we've shared over the years. We have been blessed to be able to go around the world and just share this knowledge. Craig Martell has built quite a few of these, but whenever we go, it's on our dime. There's never a dollar that we take. And even now this year, we're going to be part of another conference that will be held, I think, Judith, in July.
Yes.
Yeah, in July. That once again, that we don't take any money for that, but yes, both from the authors that have been part of us, that have gone and taken what they've learned and gone off by themselves, or even now, they stay with the company and they move forward. I believe that's a fair statement.
I think it goes back to, which is really also one of the reasons why I joined the company, because at the heart, at the genesis of who Michael and I are, and perhaps as a couple in our private life, is what keeps us together, is the fact that we believe in service. And so the more blessings that we have, the more that we want to share. And going back to the disruption nature of what Michael was doing in the beginning and continues to do to this day, to his point, the meeting that we're going to in July, is to share, right? And so, wherever we can, we want to make sure that we're helping. It is a business. It's not a nonprofit. Lmbpn is, but we do try to take profits, and we do try to make sure that we give tidings, in our personal life, and that we share the knowledge and as much of the business savvy with anybody who wants to come and join. And so I think there is a blessing to go around. And also with the 20 books to 50K, that is a nonprofit entity. It's difficult because as you get well known and as the conference becomes larger, there's always businesses that approach and want to do, rightfully so, they want to promote, but it's really difficult to draw that line and say, well, no, because at the end of the day, the purpose of that conference is really for information sharing, right?
Right.
And it's not so much for the successful authors that attend, and there's several that attend, like Michael and Dakota Crowd and many others, but it's really for that one author who is just about to write their one book, and that's the book that's going to help them and provide them income to feed their kids or pay the rent or something. And so ultimately we do all of that for that one individual. And I can tell you that I've experienced firsthand authors coming up to Michael and thanking him for the initiative of the 20 books to 50K, for the initiative that he has and sharing the knowledge when he has. And for me as his spouse, is heartwarming. And of course, I'm proud of the fact that he does do that, and that is in his nature.
Cool. I think it's in both your natures that you
Absolutely.
guys are. So I like Lmbpn Publishing. How many titles do you have at this point? And this is January 2021.
Approximately 1,000.
1,000 titles. Wow. And how about roughly how many authors are in the family?
Authors that have helped produce those is a little over 50. And that's over 100 series that we've done. We're predominantly a series-based company.
Right.
We have 65 translations presently in German, and we have 18 series under translation into German. Judith runs the international. She's, I don't know that many people know, but she's polylingual. And so with her existing international knowledge from decades, well, just two decades of experience. And she started very young.
29, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
She's the Doogie Howser of marketing.
Yes.
But just with all of that, I mean, she really does all of that. She's engaged us into China. We've been to China twice, and there's just a lot of opportunities that are going on around the company. So you want to, if you can, real quick, Judith, speak to just the different languages that you're undertaking?
Well, we're going into the markets wherever there's an opportunity, and what we're looking for is individuals who want to come and join Lmbpn, not just for a quick turnaround, but actually long term, that they're thinking long term. We were fortunate enough in Germany, for example, one of Michael's fans, a avid reader, came up to him in our first Frankfurt and asked him if he had thought about having his books translated into German. And so he said he had a translating company, and so he would like to undertake. And that, fast forward, I think it's about 3.5 years to now, where Germany is really a success because of Jens Schultz. He worked closely, and he emulated Michael's model, including advertisement, everything that Michael was doing. And so he went in step with that, and now we're successful there. And so that also has meant that we have opportunities in other countries. We've been approached by somebody in France that we're speaking to now, We have somebody in the Netherlands. Netherlands is small, but for us, we look at the individual who approaches us. We look at their intent, and then, we welcome the opportunity to work with them. And so we're happy we have Edward Meinema, who is an author, a Dutch author, and he wanted to come on and work with us. So we will be releasing those books soon in the Netherlands and around the world in Dutch.
Wow. Is it okay if I ask how many people are in the family as employees of Lmbpn?
You may
It's
ask.
yeah. Well, we tell you or not, Marcus.
Oh, I can
You
ask,
can
of
always
course.
ask.
Exactly. You can always ask.
While it is fluid because we have a lot of people, we are an international company, so we
Yeah.
have people from all over the world, whether it's Australia. One of
Right.
the ones I love to talk about is Transylvania. We have an artist that lives in Transylvania. We have an
Awesome.
editor in South Africa, Mexico, Canada. I mean, we're really all over the world.
Cool.
And from that standpoint, if we take out the authors part of it, we're probably in about the 20 range that
Okay.
we engage. A lot of them are simply part-time. They
Right.
do a very specific task and doesn't require all week long to do that.
So I'm not sure which path to go on because there's so many things I want to talk about, but I want to talk about the fact that you guys started off with a focus on ebooks in the early days and a focus on exclusivity to a major retailer, the biggest bookstore in the world.
That river.
The river. Obviously, it was very Amazon Kindle Unlimited centric. However, I remember seeing you at the World Book Fairs. I think one of the last times was at BEA in New York when there was a BEA, and working to connect this indie spirit and drive and passion and the dynamic fluidity that you can leverage fast, unlike New York publishers, but then looking for ways to integrate what you did with the old boys network. So I've long seen you guys creating this worldview that goes way beyond just ebooks and just obviously which you've spoken about. And that kind of leads to the recent acquisition. It's still within the last month or two that it was announced that, you two alone are enough of a powerhouse. And then you bring in, congratulations, Robin Cutler as your president. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, a while, probably a year and a half ago, Judith had a discussion with me because she had seen some stuff that was going on and made some suggestions. And a lot of times Judith and I will not see eye to eye immediately.
Right.
I might turn, but I'll still ponder it. I respect her both as my spouse, but more importantly, in this case, on the business side of things, and I'll continue considering it. And so I had a situation occur in September that also made me kind of really take a hard look in what is it that I wanted to accomplish with Lmbpn? What was I personally good at? As an entrepreneur, I'm allowed to play in any area I want to. And what I've learned over the last year and a half, because I tried other things, was I'm not good at all of those things. I really was able to understand what am I good at. But just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I still don't want to accomplish an opportunity in an area that I'm not good at. And so with, this guidance and wisdom from Judith and just some other, books I've been reading about entrepreneurism since I was a teenager. My dad would grab the sports pages, I'd grab the business pages. So this information, bubbles back up over time. And it's like, I need somebody who's going to do this piece I can't. Not only because I needed it, I didn't have the skill set, I didn't have the temperament either, and I didn't have the health to do it. I had over the last 4 or 5 years, my stress had gotten quite a bit. I had not recognized it whatsoever. I didn't feel like there was a problem, but I had an issue that popped up suddenly in September where my arm just died. It just, in the middle of a meeting, it just went out. And I had to, go over to Judith's office and say, can you help me here a little bit? I seem to have a problem. And so she immediately took a look and she's like, 911. And so she called. I got a trip to the hospital via ambulance, and they, put me through the ringer. And I think Judith, TMI, what is that thing that they claimed that I had?
Oh, hypertension.
Okay, hypertension. Really, my blood pressure was off the charts. and I've had to be, I had basically go down. They threw me on a lot of medicines that tossed, mentally I was not capable of focusing, and the rest of the company took care of it. But the company was still to some degree based on the individual Michael Anderle. And when when Robin Cutler joined, I told Judith that day, I go, we've matured past the owner-led company. This company doesn't require me anymore. It's mature. It's its own entity. Judith handles a big chunk of marketing and international and audio connections. And now with Robin Cutler as the president of the publishing division, that's who people will go and talk to. That's who they will engage with. And you're talking about a lady who has decades of experience, built Ingram Spark, was building Create Space before that with Amazon. Before that, she had a publishing company. Before that, she was in the college and university area. And we had this opportunity. So with Judith and I had a discussion a month earlier about a different resource. And so I went to her and I said, hey, I'm really thinking about offering Robin Cutler this position. What do you think? And she was on board with it. And so what we had planned to do is bring Robin and her husband out to Vegas. They live about 6 hours from here. And right at the beginning of December, when she had just quit and quote unquote retired. So I had this grandiose plan, and Judith was helping me. She had laid out the hotel rooms, everything was good to go, and then COVID #2 hit, and and all of a sudden that just went down the drain. And I'm like, son of a gun. Well, I don't feel like I'm really great on talking on the phone. I'm better, I believe, in person. But I had to get on the phone and get a hold of Robin and say, hey, I know you weren't able to come here, but can I talk to you anyway? And Robin has mentioned in a discussion with us this week when she was talking to someone else about how she thought I was going to be like everybody else who said, hey, I want to pimp you for information, or can you tell me how to get into Ingram? Can you? And so we took her a little bit by surprise whenever I said, hey, I'd really like to see if you'd be willing to come back to Lmbpn as the president of the publishing division, just shocking her. Judith, you want to tack in?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of points that Mike touched upon that I think it's important for anybody, right, who is publishing, whether you're on your own or whether you're thinking about establishing your publishing company. You really have to know yourself and figure out your strengths, in particular if you're thinking long term. So to Mike's point, I mean, we've been married for over 10 years, but sometimes you really don't even know the individual you're with, or perhaps you're myopic in your view. I know I was, because for me, I've been in business for such a long time. I've worked for enterprises before, that it's second nature, right, to go from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other. Not realizing that for Mike's nature, the stress that he was undertaking, I couldn't see it. I really couldn't see it, but it was in there, and it manifested itself in the way it did in September. So I didn't realize that a lot of the conversations that we were having throughout, our working with operations and everything, I would ask her, well, what about this? What about that? That is normally you ask of the leadership, right? President, Chief Executive Officer. And I didn't realize that it was putting that much strain on him. So when I started acknowledging it about a year ago, I said, look, if this is going to be too much, then you might consider bringing in someone who's going to take on the role of president, because this company right now, I equate it to, the car with gear shifts. I can drive those cars when they're available. This company right now is going from, second gear to third. We're right now in neutral transitioning. So we need to have somebody who's going to come in and then take it, because otherwise the company is going, and if it's, if it's overwhelming, it's going to kill you. Now, at the same time, he's also the creative force behind the company. There's no doubt about it. Even, with the collaborations that he is always on the phone with his collaborators. They're always coming up with ideas. And so, he was like 24/7. And the spouse in me was telling him, you need to slow down. So it was good that he thought about it. And frankly, I think everything comes to the things that should be right. Everything happens for a reason. And it was fortuitous that Robin decided to retire. And it was fortuitous that for Lmbpn, it was a time to bring on something with her caliber. We were fortunate. And the fact that she's well respected in the industry only adds to your point, Mark, the type of, the type of relationships, the type of vision that we want to have for the company, and to have somebody like that leading it in the president's role is really, it was just perfect timing all around.
I have to add, it almost feels like one of your unseen taglines might be disrupting retirement.
Exactly. Well, right twice. Yes, I think, and I
Done it
think
3
that,
times.
you what is it? When you see,
4.
yeah, Mike. I think it's part of his evil plan. It's like, let me act like and then it's all along what he wanted. So yeah, I think to your point, yeah, there's a connection.
We've done it 4 times. The first person, the Lmbpn 20 books to 50K, was actually, the plan was you, Judith. You just
yes,
took
that's
one
right.
of the longest.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes. When
Steve
I
Campbell,
actually, yeah.
Steve Campbell was retired and was just fiddling around, so he's the one that came in as operations. Lynn Stigler in the editing, unretired her, and put her to more work than she probably had done in a lot of times, because I mean, the first couple of years of her working here, that her and then what became her team was almost 24/7.
Mhm.
And then of course Robin Cutler's our latest, because I finally got Judith off this whole other kick of looking at the companies that were in the sphere of what she knew, and I'm like, no, come over here, we have cookies.
I think, one of the things that becomes a common thread, and I don't think it will, I think it's by greater design, but not necessarily by Mike's design per se, is the fact that the people that have joined us are at a point in their life where they have the luxury, right, of pursuing their heart and doing things because they want to, not because they have to.
Right.
And so all of us that have joined the company, including Mike when he started, we were fortunate that financially, right, we were set. He had his own company and I was in a well-paid industry. But all of us really are doing this because it's in our heart. And so with Robin joining us, she didn't have to join us. I'm sure she had many offers, and people wanting her to do something, that was beneficial to their companies. But I think that her entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm sure her nature as well, meshes with ours in the fact that all of us as a team, Steve, Lynn, and everybody that, David Beers, individuals who are extended team members, all of them are part of us because they want to be here. And so that's really, I think, the key to the success up to now. And we hope to keep it and maintain that as a criteria. If you want to be part of us, as a matter of fact, if you indulge me, whenever I talk to, whether it's vendors, whenever we're entering into contract negotiations, because I handle those, given my legal background, I never look at the negotiations as a one-time, this is the contract. I always make sure that I network with the individuals that we're going to work with, that we really like the people, that we believe that they're good people at heart. And then we talk about the contract, and then we talk about the fact that we're looking for long-term relationships.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to do business with someone you're not willing to break bread with.
No, exactly.
And yeah, that makes sense. So I want to get into the Opus X project because I am so thrilled to see what you guys have done. But I first have to ask this because, so Michael collaborates with a lot of authors in a very creative way, right? With imagination. But then you guys collaborate with a lot of businesses. And that's, I mean, Opus X in my mind is one of the ultimate collaborative projects that I'm so overwhelmed with. But I have to ask, Michael, how do you switch gears between the collaborations, the multiple collaborations you do with so many different amazing authors, but then also the collaborations of the business? Is there an easy switch back and forth, or how do you manage that?
Well, there's two facets to this. The first one is, and Judith, from just having to deal with me, my brain doesn't work typically like most normal brains work. So and that has bothered me over my life, because I'm just like, I don't understand people. Why is this an issue? And it took a lot of introspection, and honestly, Judith, kind of pointing this out from time to time, and years for me to accept it. But the opposite side of that, of this situation, Robin coming in fresh has made a few comments like, how is this done? And I'm like, well, I don't consider it hard. But speaking specifically to the business side, I can switch to business, but I don't want it to be said that I actually had the foresight or the thought to bring all of these businesses together for Opus X. That was strictly Judith. I would have done it the normal way, which is 2 months before release. Hey, we should throw up a cover. And Judith at the time we were living out of our condo down at on the strip, and I have some glass in there, and so I'm writing all of these things that can be done, right? And Judith comes into my office one day, and she's looking at this, and she's like, "Well, when are you going to have your meetings?" I'm like, "What meetings?" And she's like, "You're planning on releasing this like this, right?" And I'm like, "Yep." And she's like, "Well, who are these?" And so I started naming them off, and she's like, "You need to get this all done." And my head just exploded, because I'm assuming when she says, you know, that needs to get done, that I need to do it. And I'm like,
Right.
that's not me.
You're in the headlight.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, she's like, do you want me to take care of this? Yes, please. And so she did. She started reaching out to individuals that she didn't know, but that's never stopped Judith. She's got one of the best relationship capabilities that I've seen in people, and still knows some of the top in, tier people in her industry in countries around the world. And so I've always believed in her ability to create relationships, and this was an example of that, where she just started the process, and she would ask things that I wouldn't have asked, because I'm like, they're never going to do that. 3 hours later, what, they're going to join us? you know
Well, I think,
so
if I may, if you step back, so why Opus X, or what the reason? Mike, to your point, we do go to a lot of the trade shows, and we do look at the outside industry besides just, the Kindle Unlimited Amazon exclusivity, which is a great relationship and partnership. But there's another world, right? In particular, outside of the US, where, there's other companies that are large and larger, and have a bigger stake. And so how do we reach those readers? Well, we have to go wide. And so Mike started thinking about that a year before and saying, okay, I need to start learning what wide means. And rather than, subject one of the collaborations and the collaborators and their income and risk their income, he thought, you know what, it has to be me. I'm going to learn with one of my books. And he knew going in that it was probably going to be a losing proposition, simply because it was going to be learning and a learning curve. But he wanted to put his best foot forward. So the first thing we did is meet with Gene Malika up in New York, because he's one of the best when it comes to covers, and decided that the covers were going to be the best that we could put out. And so we worked with Gene for a whole year before even, thinking about the fact that the books were being written, and Michael was coming up and writing and coming to stories. And so I remember that when Gene said, well, what are you thinking about? You need to give me the layout. Mike was like putting out book 11, book 12. I mean, he literally put out this whole world in a spreadsheet, and who the characters were going to be. And he was thinking about what it would look like. And I want it to look like this, and I want the colors to be that. And so, so there was a lot of creativity, but no substance, no plan of action tied to it. And
not at one.
so, not right. And so when literally I was going up to New York, looking at models and getting costumes. Gene and the team were getting, and Sasha were getting costumes from Hollywood. So there was a lot of expense going into these covers, and Michael was taking care of the writing. And so, all of that was happening. There was a lot of things going on. And then when about a year before, I said, okay, so when are you going to release it? It's November 1st, 2019. And I said, great. So what happens before, because I didn't know what happens before then. It's, well, Steve will release it. And I go, no, but before that, well, it's a day before or 2 days before, whatever they were doing. There was no pre-orders or anything like that. Long story short, my background, coming from where I come from, we're used to teams, right? I was a leader of my franchise. And, you don't release billion-dollar pharmaceuticals on your own. You always have a team, and you put a group of people together that you as a leader believe will be the best in their positions to make sure that this project comes to fruition. And I tell you, knock on wood, the projects that I was involved with always were delivered on time, and they exceeded expectations, but it had nothing to do with me. It really had to do with the team. And so in this case, I asked Mike, I said, okay, if you were putting your ideal team together to release this, who would it be from a wide standpoint? And literally, he said, draft to digital. He said, from an international standpoint, publish drive. He said, Kobo has to be a part of it. Of course, Amazon has to be a part of it. And so, we said, okay, what about audio? Well, we had Dreamscape already, as part of our partner. So we didn't have to look out beyond anyone else. Said, okay, so this would be the dream team. He said, yes. And so, and including Apple. And so, I reached out sent out an initial email. And I have to say that it's, credit to Michael, because I said, Michael is launching this new project. Would you like to be a part of it? Would you like to be a partner? Everybody asked, what does partnership mean? Because people thought, what is financial investment? And there was none. And so that's how it started. And the willingness of everybody to come on board and put their time. And the first meeting we had, we laid out, okay, how often should we meet? Everybody suggested, once a month. Okay, we'll make it for a half hour, because I know everybody's time is precious. So we didn't want to take up too much people's time. So we'll have half-hour meetings, and it'll be information sharing to prepare us for this launch. And part of the give back that we mentioned, and really why I think everybody came on board, was the fact that we said the purpose of this launch is not to make Lmbpn bigger, is not to get Michael's name out. Michael has a very well-known name. Is really for us to learn how to go wide and then share that knowledge with the rest of the indie community. So what we're going to do as a team is we're going to put together our knowledge and have a white paper that discusses everything we do and how we learn, and then we're going to share it with the indie community. And I think that that was the selling point for everybody. And frankly, that's what got everyone on a timely basis would come into our meetings every month on time, and everybody would join and share ideas. And we learned a lot. We learned that pre-orders could be done a year ahead of time. We learned about pricing, box sets. We learned a lot of things and information that really has helped, I think, the community overall, because we were able to deliver a white paper with all that knowledge.
It's amazing. It almost feels as well, it was almost like starting from scratch in many ways, because of multiple formats, pre-orders, planning, teams, multiple countries, all of the different moving parts, actors posing, right? Like with Gene Mullick, like all of the stuff, the video trailer, which made it look like a movie, where you also took a lot of time and effort into acknowledging all of your partners in a subtle way, in that Blade Runner-esque.
Yeah, but you forget about some of those. I have an interesting question for you, Mark, because I'd like to kind of point out something that can help the listeners. I hope they can. But you came in, you had a pre-existing relationship with us, so that was certainly a help. But I knew of you, of course, Kobo knowledge, right? Because I think you may have stepped down, or right about then we're stepping down from Kobo.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so from that though, but coming at it even then, you knew us external, but you'd never really kind of worked with us internally. When those meetings occurred, what were your thoughts about those meetings and how they were ran?
So one of the things that frustrates me, I love the indie spirit, but like you said, it's like, oh, I wrote a book. Okay, it's edited. I'm going to publish it. Like no plan whatsoever. I do come with a long background in traditional publishing. So I know that the reason BEA is in May is because they're buying books for September, right? Because they plan in advance and they do things like that. So I was used to knowing that world. And this was the first time I had seen somebody who's hugely successful in the indie space take a step back and say, we're not going to just release it. We're going to release this in all formats and all manners with planning ahead. So when I saw the team that you guys were putting together to do this, I was thinking, wow, this isn't just a point and click mentality of, oh yeah, get it out fast, rapid release, whatever. Now there was rapid release, but it was pre-scheduled really strategically, obviously applying a lot of what you've already learned from the industry, listening to people on the other side of the fence. And in a lot of cases, traditional publishers look at indie publishing with their, look down their nose at it. And in a lot of ways, indie authors look at traditional publishing saying, well, you have your nose up something else. Like they don't actually see the perks from both sides. You guys saw that. You also applied people from all aspects of the industry, from the self-publishing side as well as from the traditional publishing side. You applied all these teams together, and I was feeling like I was lucky enough to be involved in the history. When we look back in another 100 years at the history of publishing, I think this is going to be one of those definitive moments where people say, and this is one of those bridges that brought these two sides of the industry together in a way that demonstrated you can be both indie and you can be dynamic and spirited and creative and all of those amazing things that make indie publishing so fantastic, but you can also apply the long-term strategy and planning of long-term business and understanding all of the things that traditional publishing actually bring value to. I mean, to me, it was overwhelmingly, why aren't, like, I get frustrated. Why aren't more people making a big deal about this? Because again, I think it's happening, but it's almost like the boiling frog. Because it's happening in such subtle ways, I don't think people recognize the magnitude. So, I mean, I'm still disappointed people don't just go, whoa, this is amazing. But then again, a lot of people on one side of the fence can only see one side, and then the other can only see that. So when I saw what you guys were doing, and even the meetings, like, oh my God, it was like Judith was a drill sergeant, and everyone, we're starting on time and we're finishing on time because I respect everyone on the team. And it was like,
respect your time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
I
that
don't
doesn't
want to
even
tell you half
happen
hour
in
and hold you
publishing.
45 or an hour. That's, yeah.
I mean, it was like, no, we're going to stay on time. We're going to stay on task. We're going to stay on target. And kudos to you guys for doing this, because I can't speak enough of it. And recognizing, when you reported in the last meeting that I was privileged to be a part of, you reported, okay, here's where we are, but we're not thinking about just 2019 and 2020. We're thinking about the long term. Like, you're already planning ahead as you finish off the series, and you already got plans, collaborative plans with your partners. Wow. I mean, I'm still like, I want to be the cheerleader and the champion saying,
I think
told you they were going to do it.
I think so it goes back to the disruption, right? It's not, both sides can have their own view of each other, right? Traditional publishing can have their view of indie, and indie can have, but if you stay in your silos, you're never going to get ahead. You're never going to learn. And unfortunately, it takes something like COVID, right, to bring both worlds together and go, wait a minute, you guys need to rethink the way you're doing business, because something unfortunately tragic can make the industry, stand up and take notice. And so we were fortunate enough that we've been able to kind of weather this with our readers, because we were already prepared in a way for people staying home, for people reading, for people listening. And Opus X is an example of us acknowledging the fact that traditional publishing, or what you would call, or what anybody would call legacy, there's a lot of knowledge there. It's not something to say, oh, I don't want to be, traditional. I think anybody that thinks that way is missing out. And likewise, traditional companies that think, I don't want to be indie, they're missing out, because the being nimble, the being agile, I think is something that they need to have. And so you're going to start, and to your point, I think it's already, I won't name names, but there's companies already thinking about the fact that they want to put indie, meetings. And so you would have never thought of these individual companies thinking that way, but they have to, right? Because, that's a need. And so if both sides would just acknowledge that there's value and look at the value and try to learn from it, I think ultimately, if everybody remembers that at the end of the day, it's about the readers, then they'll be fine. And so thank you for acknowledging that. But I think, kudos to all of you who would show up, because, you didn't have to, right? You weren't getting paid. And frankly, when we think strategically, and when we will continue to acknowledge everything that our partners provided, to the end, when we advertise, we will always make sure to give the kudos and give back as much as we can, because we appreciate the fact that all of you took your time and came on and helped us in this information sharing venture.
Cool. I wanna kind of close with, because we're science fiction-y people here, right? We're talking about the science fiction worlds. If you had access to a time machine and you went back in time to talk to Michael and Judith at the beginning of this journey, what sort of things would you, without the butterfly effect ruining anything, what sort of advice would you want to make sure that they had?
You go first, Judith.
So, I always go to what's primary for me, and I believe I'm speaking for Michael as well. First thing is that we're a couple. First thing is that we're parents, right? Our children come first, our family comes first, we as a unit come first, our extended family, and then what we do. And so I think that if I was to be able to give advice to Judith coming on and trying to learn the business and everything, is to remember that in communicating with each other, that you have to remember that you're always speaking to your spouse. And so I would come at it, from my business standpoint and my knowledge and everything without, and unfortunately that event kind of grounded us without thinking about the impact that the business or the trajectory or the speed, or to your point, formalizing things would have on Mike. And so my advice would be just don't worry about it. Take care of you as a couple first, and everything will be okay. We're okay, by the way, so I don't want anybody to think that there's anything wrong. We're, thank God, fine, but we've been able to weather this transition because we obviously care for each other, love each other. But I think that that's an advice that I would give on a personal level.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I'll go on the business side of things. When this was started, it was just me. And then slowly it moved out, but I also had my mindset wasn't that I wasn't willing to share. Sometimes I overshare, but I still kept things closer to the vest because there was a certain amount of ego involved. And, it took me a while to actually understand how to share more of that out through encouragement and everything else. And, one of my previous bosses in my life told me one time, he goes, you will make it as high as you give credit to others for. So if you're willing to give credit to others, you will go higher. If you want the credit, if you want it, you're not going to go nearly as high. And it's held so true, right? You're smiling and laughing, so you know some of this. So what's up there, Mark?
No, I just think that you've personified that in many ways.
Yeah. So in my learning from the business side is give up, let the others do what they are amazing at. Don't try to, and it's you always learned it every single time when that little piece is going. But I did this. But I did this. Shut up. It wasn't you all anyway. But that's that's a little bit of mine. I wish that I had not done some of the things that I endeavored to make happen because I wanted this. I sought growth, and I sought growth well enough so that our bank account hurt. It's made some bad decisions against some recommendations from the team, and I was like, I still want to go after it. I did. I just didn't necessarily do it in a great or smart way. And I wish I had listened more to my team of supporters and those that were giving the advice than I did before. I'm glad that I'm doing a much better job of it now.
That's brilliant. And I love that it comes back to team collaboration. And you both focus on that family team, right? Team number one,
Yes.
company team and collaborations, which again, I think is going to be the genesis of what takes our industry forward, doing things in collaborative ways. Guys, thank you so much for taking so much time to hang out with me today.
Thank you.
It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for the insightful questions.
Something I really admire about Judith and Michael is always looking forward, always future looking at the business. You go back to when Judith wanted the business plan, and Michael's like, creative guy. It's like, I just got to write a book and let's get this out there and let's release it. And she took a step back in terms of the business and the business planning, but there always been future thinking. So when you look at the origin, so Michael got his start with 100% Amazon focus and being exclusive to Amazon and not worrying about anything else and doing really, really well. Obviously making that work brilliantly and obviously inspiring thousands of other authors in the 20 books to 50K movement, etc. But he didn't let that limit himself. And I obviously, in partnership with someone like Judith, who would not limit it to a single platform, who understood the bigger business world. I'm still in awe, seeing them at different book fairs around the world. Even though their world was 100%, pretty much mostly 100% making money off of ebooks and Kindle Unlimited page reads, they were still looking for something bigger. They were still looking for that. Remember that vision that Lmbpn that comes from fashion initially and comes from a global perspective from the very early days, and looking for partnerships in the industry. And I think that foresight is going to allow them to grow in really amazing ways that I don't even think they're aware of, or they're probably aware of, but they're in different areas. They're open to it. Looking at this project. So for example, Michael obviously partners and co-authors with so many different authors, and they didn't want to because they knew going wide was going to be a risk, that there was not going to be guaranteed income in the way that they had already learned. So they took a venture. They took a bold, brave leap into a world they were not as familiar with, turned to other people in the industry for support, advice, and learning, had open minds, but also they bore that risk themselves. They didn't say with one of Michael's co-authors, hey, we're going to do this thing, and it's going to be a year or two before you actually start to make money, because they recognize that it's a really long-term haul, and that the investment in getting the book out in all formats and planning it in advance is going to take a long time. And the fact that in the same way that Michael shared his story to help inspire other authors in that, that community, the 20 books to 50K community, etc. They're taking these learnings and these huge, huge investments and using that experience to help other authors understand and learn from those things and learn from those huge investments. And that goes back to that compassion and wanting to help others and being there to help others. And I think that mindset, that compassion for the community, for the author community, for the publishing community, on top of their business savvy, the dynamic nature by which they can operate like a powerhouse indie publisher, yet bring in people like Robin Cutler who really know the industry from the traditional side and know the book print world a lot better than they have. They're going to be able to take and make this industry better. They're going to be able to move it forward in fascinating new ways. I am really, really excited to see where they take the industry, and I can't overstate enough how much I admire the way that they've taken my vision that I've had for a long time about the future of publishing and the collaborations involved. And they're helping make those things a reality. They're helping to pave the way, not just for indie authors, but to pave the way for traditional publishers. They're demonstrating mechanisms by way publishers can operate in a collaborative way with multiple winners. And ultimately, readers that get to win because they can have the book in whatever format they prefer, wherever in the world they want to read it. And in many ways, as you've seen, as they move into different languages, etc., because of partnerships with other publishers and authors and people in the industry in different languages that they choose. So thank you to Lmbpn Publishing for thank you, Michael and Judith, for proving something that I've long been saying about the future of publishing. I'm really excited to see where you guys are taking this, and I know that the rest of us are benefiting from watching and learning to see how these things operate. So that is it for episode 178 of the Stark Reflections podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the podcast, if you value the podcast, I would appreciate if you took the time to leave a review on the podcatcher of your choice. Just needs to be a line or two, but reviews really do help other people discover the podcast. If you're interested in supporting the podcast in other ways, for as little as $1, $3, or $5 a month, you can become a patron of the podcast and get access to additional patron-only content. You can check that out over on patreon.com/starkreflections. And thank you to all my patrons for the support that you give this podcast. It really means a lot to me that you're taking the time to offer that. I hope that the bonus content is valuable to you. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode. So, until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.